It's clear if you look at the understanding Israelis have about the world, and that the understanding that Palestinians have about the world. And I'm not saying that's all there is at all in this struggle. And it may not be, in some ways, the central issue if you look at the entire broad Middle East. There's another factor there, which I'll get to. But if you look at those two, it is clear that in some very uncanny ways, they are deeply like each other in their stories, but their stories seem to contradict each other in some ways because they're so much like each other. How are they like each other? Well, the most obvious one. Each one of them says, we have a passionate, deep connection with this land, the land between the Jordan and the sea. And the second way they're alike is each one says, oh, no. If you have such a passionate attachment, that must mean that I don't have a legitimate attachment, so you are not allowed to have a passionate attachment or to claim you do. That's the second way they're very similar. And you can see what kind of a disaster that makes. There's a third way in which they're very similar. Both of them have suffered deep, deep wounds in their recent history. And I think I know which wound you might say is deeper, but it doesn't matter. If you have been through a life of abuse, it doesn't matter to say somebody else had a worse abuse. It's your own experience of being abused that shapes your life. And both the peoples, the Israeli peoplehood, Jewish Israelis at least, see the crucial event in their life before there was a formal nation state. See the Shoah, the Nazi Holocaust, as a crucial forming event in that culture. An event of profound abuse. And Palestinians see what Palestinians call the Nakba, the disaster of the exile of hundreds of thousands, millions perhaps, of Palestinians from the land they understood as home, as the forming disaster of their culture. And mostly, not universally, but mostly, each of the peoples doesn't want to hear about the other's memory, the other's understanding of their stories. We know that when you put two people, forget about two people, that makes it even worse. When you take a person who has grown up under conditions of deep abuse, it is more likely, for sure not 100%, but more likely that that person will grow up to inflict abuse. In the process of having both internalized that abuse and to prevent it from being visited upon him or her. So now, take two peoples who have grown up and shaped their culture and shaped their understandings of themselves, their own histories. Put them in a room together with nobody helping, watching. Each of them acting out of that sense of abuse. And you are very likely to get disastrous interrelationships, destructive interrelationships. One of the wisest teachings of Torah, repeated some 30 times, says, you must love the stranger because you were strangers in the land of, the Hebrew word is Mitzrayim. It means the land of tight and narrow space, Egypt. Because you experienced that, you must love and treat with equality and justice the stranger when you get to be the controllers, owners, sojourners, not more than sojourners, in your own land. All right, so to me that seems like very sweet and powerful and important teaching. And then I ask myself a second level question. How come it's 30 sometimes in the Torah? If I had to tell my kids 30 times to do X, it wasn't because they were doing it, it was because they weren't doing it. Now, why would a people, a community, not just easily, organically, treat whoever they thought were strangers decently, having experienced being strangers, outcasts, pariahs themselves? So that raises the question, if the two victimized peoples who are so focused on their victimization are sitting in the room together, beating up on each other, and each one, when somebody says, hey, you shouldn't do that, says, he did it first. Well, I also know as a parent, the last sensible thing you want to do when one of the kids says, he hit me first, was to stop and hold a whole inquest into who hit who first. That is not the most useful thing to do. The most useful thing to do is, first, maybe separate the kids. Secondly, to find out what's going on for each one of them, and to try to meet the needs of each one of them. And if their needs collide, to try to figure out how to meet the most crucial need of each without shattering the needs of the other. That, I think, is what real negotiation is about. It's not just a political act. From my perspective, one of the most creative, interesting, and still open possibilities for peacemaking in the not only Palestinian-Israeli, but Arab state-Israeli conflict has come from where one might not have expected it. The king of Saudi Arabia moving the entire Arab League to propose a peace treaty between all the Arab states and Israel on the condition that Israel then, or not then, at the same time, comes to a peace treaty with an independent Palestinian state, more or less along the lines of the 1967 border. The Israeli government, when this was first proposed, basically shrugged and rejected even discussion. The issue has just arisen again. A key assistant to the King of Morocco, which is one of the few places where, despite all the conflicts, for the last 20 years, Muslim and Jewish communities have lived in decent relationship with each other in Morocco. An assistant to the King of Morocco has just surfaced the Saudi and Arab League proposal again. I would hope, if I were trying to invent the next 8 years of United States policy, I would say that insisting on such a gathering, on such a conference, with the goal being an independent Palestine, a secure Israel, and peace treaties, not just armistices, but peace treaties between all the Arab states and Israel, that should be one of the major goals of American policy, and that the American government should push anybody who is unwilling to take place in such a conference with such a goal to do it.
We have two more questions. This one is, to the rabbi, we must also deal with the historical facts regarding Zionism prior to World War II, during the war, including those in the U.S. that kept refugees out of the U.S.
Well, yeah, we need to deal with that history. The State of Israel was an attempt to deal with that history. It does now exist. It has created a culture which is not the old Jewish culture and something really new. It's not even Jewish religion, right? There, I don't know, a couple of million atheist Israelis, or so they say about themselves, who talk Hebrew, who celebrate the holidays but not as holy days, you might say, in the Jewish calendar, who carry on a society. And so in that sense, you're right, the history, I think, did have to be dealt with. It turns out, of course, not of course, it turns out, oddly enough, that's better than of course, that perhaps if you're after safety, the families that chose to leave Eastern Europe for the United States, rather than choosing to leave Eastern Europe for Palestine and Israel, if safety was the goal, chose better coming to the United States. If the goal was to create a self-governing, including making its own mistakes, as well as making its own triumphs and celebratory advances for Jewish peoplehood, then maybe the choice to go to Israel was wiser. Though sometimes, Jewish feminism didn't get invented there, got invented here.
But many of them were not allowed to come to the United States.
Well, I understand that. I mean, after 1921, you're right. And so, I'm not sure what the question was aiming at, but I'm not one who thinks it was a mistake that there be a state. I think the state's behavior has been full of mistakes. But I think even the choice of how there be a state and the shape of the state and a whole series of questions like that might have been far more wisely done. But I do think that given the situation in at least by 1945, that it was not a mistake, that there was some kind of place. Lots of mistakes in making a place.
Is the one-state solution the answer? Anybody?
Well, I would say not unless the populations are so mixed and mushed together that there turns out to be no way. Dr. Khan said we were sort of on the edge of it being almost impossible. If the populations are so mixed that there's no way to disentangle, then in decency there might have to be. But I think the likelihood of getting there without worse bloodbaths than we have been through already is very low. And it seems to me there are two distinctive cultures, and the two distinctive cultures ought to be most effectively represented by two distinctive but friendly governments, seems to me. But I can see that what's the policies that have been underway for the last 5 or 8 years or so are making it harder and harder and harder to create a decent two-state solution.